Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond Never Again. Today we are doing our sixth and final leg in our six-week journey of how the Holocaust speaks to us today, attempting to learn from the Holocaust, to gain perspective from the Holocaust on how to live our lives today as Jews. And today's lesson is titled, When Night Will Shine Like Day. Today's lesson is sponsored generously, I should say co-sponsored generously by Shari Baker and an anonymous sponsor who are sponsoring it together in loving memory of Shari's brother, who just recently passed away. She's actually sitting Shiva now, which is why she's not here on the Zoom. And his name was Simcha Beryl ben Yisrael Meir Halevi. May his neshama have an aliyah. May he be a good tebetter, a good intercessor on behalf of Shari and her family and all of us. May we speedily be reunited with him, with the coming of Mashiach, speedily in our days. Amen. Today we're going to be asking some very interesting questions. We've reached the end of our journey, and it's really time to ask questions like, what does the Holocaust tell us about humanity's capacity for evil? These were questions that when this lesson was written 20 years ago, were probably relevant. I mean, they've always been relevant, right? But I feel like maybe for most Americans, it was kind of like, yeah, it's a question. Never again, never again, never again. The world swore never again, etc. But I find that these kind of questions, like here's another one, are ordinary people capable of performing acts of altruistic good, right? While at the same time asking, what is the motivation of those who, in a situation where everybody's doing evil, they choose to do something good? These are questions that I think we need to ask ourselves even stronger. First of all, in the wake of October 7th. Second of all, in the wake of the current political climate here in the U.S., I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, we're living in more and more of a violent time, and more of a volatile time, and more of an extreme time. And as a result, I think these questions become, I'm not trying to be alarmist, I never have been somebody who feels, and I think I'll probably be one of the last people to say, that America today feels like Germany in the 1930s. I don't know if that's true. I think America has some very foundational values that are very, very different than what Germany was built on at the time. Even if you believe they're under attack, even if you feel that perhaps that's being challenged today, it doesn't make a difference. I still, I'm here fresh, as some of you know, I think, from a trip. My son and I went. We left on Saturday night. We were 24 hours in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. My brother made a bar mitzvah, and I took my son for 7-8 hours around Washington, D.C. And to me, one of the most important things was to take him to go see the Declaration of Independence, the original document, which is on display there, as well as the Bill of Rights. Particularly to show him the First Amendment, and to show him freedom of religion and what that's based on in this country. And I'm a firm believer that this country is different, even with everything that's going on. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking ourselves these questions. I think that we should have been asking ourselves these questions even in previous climates, but especially today, we should be asking ourselves these questions. What does the Holocaust tell us about humanity? We spent a lot of time asking questions about what the Holocaust tells us about God. I don't know that we spent enough time asking what the Holocaust tells us about humanity. And that's why I really want to open today's lesson with a quote from Elie Wiesel. So on page, this is a little bit, we don't usually do this. On page 153 of your book, which is kind of where it says lesson 6, and kind of like the cover page, there's a quote there from one of Elie Wiesel's books. And I want to open with that quote, because I really think that's how I'd like to frame, that's the posture with which I'd like to go into today's lesson. So you've heard me say before in this course, I don't remember which lesson, that I've read more than one of Elie Wiesel's books, memoirs. The first one, and I believe they should be read as a pair. The first one I've read was called Night. I think that's probably the most popular one. Most of you have probably read this. I think at some point it was even high school reading. Could be it still is. Maybe it depends which high school, etc. A book called Night. It's a very negative book. It's written shortly after the Holocaust. It's a very depressing book when you read it. It throws a very negative, paints a very negative picture. And then years later, he wrote another memoir, which is called All Rivers Run to the Sea. On page 403, Elie Wiesel relates the following conversation that he had with the Rebbe, and I'd like to ask one of you to read it for us, please. Gloria, do you think you can read it for us, please?
All right.
That's the school.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
that was
Okay.
some of the kids in the school making some noise. I closed the door. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Rebbe, I asked, how can you believe in God after Auschwitz? He looked at me in silence for a long moment, his hands resting on the table. Then he replied in a soft, barely audible voice, how can you not believe in God after Auschwitz? Whom else could one believe in? Hadn't man abdicated his privileges and duties? Didn't Auschwitz represent the defeat of humanity? Apart from God, what was there in a world darkened by Auschwitz? The rabbi stared at me, awaiting my response. I hesitated before answering. Rebbe, if what you say is meant as an answer to my question, I reject it. But if it is a question, one more question, I accept it.
I think there's a very powerful perspective that's being offered here. We often want to know where was God in the Holocaust, and probably many of you came to this course to hear me answer that question. And I hope I have successfully convinced you that I will not be answering that question. Why did God allow the Holocaust to happen or anything like that? But today I'm posing a different question to you, which is, what does the Holocaust tell us today about humanity? What does it mean to live in a post-Holocaust world? We're going to be doing so in 3 steps. Step 1 is, I just turned the doorbell on to do not disturb.
If we ask questions later.
Come again? Of course there's going to be questions, yeah. There will be time for questions later.
Now or later?
No, later is probably better. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to be doing this through a 3-step process. The first section is called The Pity of It All. And we're going to talk about the futility of relying on human beings. Number 2, we're going to talk about the capacity that a human being has to choose between good and evil. It's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And finally, we're going to talk about what it means to be a righteous Gentile. What we believe as Jews, for the world at large, non-Jews. We know, I think most of you know what the Torah demands of Jews. But the question is, does the Torah have a sense of guidance for the non-Jewish world? And this 3rd section, by the way, is really going to be a microcosm of a course that I'm giving later this year. You know me, I like to plug a course whenever I can. So in the spring, I think it is, or maybe it's in the winter, I'm gonna be giving you a course that's called For All Humankind. And we're going to talk about Judaism's vision, not just for the Jewish world, but for all humankind. What the Jewish view is on the rest of the world. You know, the universalistic aspect of Judaism, which is not often discussed, certainly not, in a Chabad house or a shul, which is geared towards Jews. We don't often talk about that, but I think it's an important topic. When we're done with those 3 sections, I want to spend like 10-15 minutes doing a little exercise. Having completed this course, it's what we're calling Beyond Never Again Revisited. So, first of all, we're going to review the course, but more importantly, we're going to try and take 6 lessons away from the 6 lessons that we learned and do some exercises to kind of reflect on how we walked into this course and how we walked out of it. All right? So that's the plan for today. Everybody ready? Okay.
Yep.
The pity of it all. We're opening with a quote from Ecclesiastes. Okay, now I want to tell you something about Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes was written by who? Anybody?
Solomon.
King Solomon, yes. King Solomon wrote 3 works that we have as part of our Tanakh. Okay? The first one is called Shir HaShirim, or Song of Songs. He wrote Song of Songs in his youth. And it has that kind of a vibe to it. It actually reads like a love poem. Euphemistically, it's talking about God and our relationship with God and our love for God and God's love for us, etc. He then continues later on in his middle-aged years. He writes a book called Mishlei, or Proverbs. Okay, full of different proverbs that are all analogies that he's learned throughout his wisdom, as he's going through life. Again, about our relationship with God. And finally, Ecclesiastes is much more in his older age, where he's reflecting back on his time in this world and the wisdom that he's accrued over the many years. As we know, the King Solomon was, according to Jewish tradition, was the wisest man to have ever lived. And from what I understand, Ecclesiastes was written actually as like a sermon, and he delivered it as a sermon towards the end of his life. We have it today as a book, but at a Hakel ceremony. More on this some other time, but Hakel is a mitzvah for Jews to gather once every 8 years for everybody to come, men, women, and children, to the temple, and the king addresses them. And as the king at the time, this was his address. That's my understanding of where Kohelet comes from, where Ecclesiastes comes from. And text 1 is a very, very interesting text. Jonathan, can you read it for us, please? It's on page 154. You're muted though, so don't forget to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. I made myself great works. I built myself houses and I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards and I planted in them all sorts of fruit trees. I accumulated for myself also silver and gold and the treasures of the kings and the provinces. I acquired for myself various types of musical instruments, the delight of sons of men, wagons, and coaches. So I became great and I increased more than all of who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. And of that my eyes desired, I did not deprive them. I did not deprive my heart of any joy, but my heart rejoiced with all my toil, and this was my portion from all my toil. Then I turned to look at all my deeds that my hands had wrought, and upon the toil that I had toiled to do. And behold, everything is vanity and frustration, and there is no profit under the sun.
This is probably one of the most famous quotes from Ecclesiastes. Hevel avodim hakel hevel. Emptiness and vanity, everything is empty. Everything is nothing. Right? Now, I'm sure there are some of you on the Zoom that are watching the recording later that are at the age when King Solomon wrote this, towards, in their golden years and in the reflecting years where you look back and you think about all, etc. Why do you think it is that King Solomon had such a negative assessment of his many accomplishments? By the way, he had a lot of accomplishments. If any of you know a little bit of the history of King Solomon, he really did. And yet he looks back at it and he says everything is nothing. Why do you think he had that kind of a view? We're on page 155 here. Gloria, you wanna shed some light here? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Pretend to be King Solomon for a moment for us.
Well, because in a sense, you can't take it with you.
Okay.
Okay.
That's probably a huge part of it.
Yeah. And have you left something for others? This is all talking about what he did for, it's being
For himself.
For himself. Yeah,
Right.
for himself. Did you leave for others?
I think he's mentioning another point here, which is, what did it do for me?
Mm.
You know the line, money can't buy happiness?
Right.
Maybe there's a lot of other things that also can't buy happiness. Not just silver. Maybe all the houses you build and the places that you visit. I mean, there's a lot of things that the world today glorifies. Travel is a big one. People are like, now I'm ready for retirement. I'm going to travel the world. But really, 20, 30 years later, you're done with retirement and you've traveled the whole world. And what does it really do for you? Not much. Doesn't really. I mean, it's wonderful and it's cool to see, and you acquire wisdom, you acquire knowledge. But what is it really all worth? I mean, the more you live life, the more you spend time. I think the more things you accomplish. A lot of people talk about, like, when the game is no longer challenging. Anybody ever hear that phrase? Right? Like, I'll talk for myself. I'm currently in a phase where Baruch Hashem I'm married, Baruch Hashem I have children, which might have been goals of mine at some point, right? And I still have to have more children. I still have to build a family, etc. To bring up those children. I said these are future goals, and I'd like to buy a house, and at a certain point you check off a lot of those things. That's when you start to realize I've been living my life only based on checking things off.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, one of the places we could take this conversation is into a conversation on meaning in life and purpose in life. That if to you the only things that are meaningful and purposeful are the things that you're accomplishing in life, but not the actual moments in life, then we have a problem, right? And that's actually what the next course is about, the Kabbalah of meaning, which I've already spoken to some of you about, and which at the end of this course I'll offer a 10% discount for returning students, because it's literally starting November 3rd. We're going to be doing 6 weeks. And actually, if I remember correctly, one of the lessons has this as the opening text. For the same reason, like, you could take this and turn this whole conversation about what it means to lead a meaningful life. But I think what's happening here is King Solomon is realizing these things don't lead to happiness. These things don't lead to security. With money, you cannot buy security with money either. You know that? You cannot buy inner peace with money. You cannot buy happiness. You cannot buy security, being secure in life with money. And I think that, unfortunately, there were many German Jews at the time, in the 1930s in Germany, who learned this the very, very hard way. The reading that we're going to read now, text 2, is from an account by Fritz Grunfeld. Okay, now Fritz Grunfeld was not the founder. He was the last, I guess, the final CEO, or if you will, or whatever, director of the company Grunfeld Textile Company, which was a prestigious manufacturer that sold bedding and apparel. And they were founded in the 1800s. You can Google them. It's fascinating. And it stayed in the family for 3 generations. And then it survived all the way up until 1938, when it came under attack by the Nazi movement. I won't even call it government, because it wasn't just the government, as you'll see in a moment. And it was one of the largest companies to suffer what we call Aryanization, right? To Aryanize it, right? Let's see how this works in text 2, how he reflects on it. Mark, if I can ask you to read it for us, please. We're on page 156.
Our customers were the first front to be mobilized against us in this war of destruction. Our employees became the second front. The loyalty of our employees was systematically undermined. This showed itself when they were branded as friends of the Jews by the Stürmer. To facilitate their terrorism, the employees' full addresses were printed in the paper. The intimidation, the fear of being publicly marked as a slave of the Jews, I can't pronounce that, discouraged all those in our firm who had so far remained loyal to the enterprise. At the same time, it encouraged those who were inclined to sabotage, to betray, and to spy. They went as far as to listen to our phone conversations, to check our mail, and to search our garbage bins. Eventually, apart from the few Jewish workers who were isolated in any case, only a few of the hundreds of employees remained loyal to us and were not intimidated by the risks involved. The third front in this destructive fight was the press. Increasing numbers of newspapers and magazines refused to publish our advertisements. Once we were prevented from publishing ads in any German newspaper or magazine, we were deprived of our most efficient means of advertisement. The fourth front, stabbing us in the back, was our former suppliers and contractors. They increasingly refused to deliver to us. At the same time, all authorities and party offices, such as the trustees of labor, the labor front, the Gestapo, and the customs agencies, created a fifth front against us with summons, house searches, and inspections, all with the purpose of shattering our position. In addition to them were the state and local tax agencies. In 1938, like vultures surrounding someone condemned to death, a great number of mediators and negotiators suddenly appeared on the scene. Based on experience they had gained in conducting successful Aryanizations, they came up with advice and disguised threats. Walter Cole, owner of the Max Cole retail business, soon proved to be the most serious bidder. Mr. Cole, naturally, like all Aryan buyers of Jewish enterprises, got a much lower purchase price than he would have gotten under normal circumstances. He was nevertheless convinced that he had saved us by buying our firm. Finally, State Secretary Brinkman, responsible for such matters as in the Reich Economic Ministry, demanded a sum of 200,000 RM for the official approval of the Aryanization. The sum was raised by us and Cole. A commercial publication to our customers in October 1938 already carried the sentence, Grunfeld now under German ownership.
The fact that Jews had integrated into German society, had assimilated to try and be as German as the Germans, if not more German than the Germans, the fact that they were successful in literature and science and music and social status and patriotism and education didn't make a difference. You know who some of Grunfeld's biggest customers were? Magda Goebbels' wife, and Emmy Goering, also Goering's wife, were some of the biggest customers of the Grunfeld Textile Company, and that didn't stop. That didn't protect them. It didn't make them any more secure or any more, because they had integrated. They had become more German than the Germans themselves. That didn't really help. And the next text, I think, really stresses how the great contributions that the Jews made to German culture and science didn't really protect them from this Nazi onslaught. The book we're going to read from next is called The Pity of It All. That's the name of this section that we're in right now. And it's by Amos Ilan, who's an Israeli writer. And some of the people on the list, by the way, that he's going to mention, they actually converted to Christianity, you know? And none of these things helped. And that's what he means when he says the pity of it all. Let's see what he writes. I think we're holding Gloria. If you can read for us, please, text 3 on page 158.
Okay. Shortly before the onset of the Inquisition, a Spanish Jew boasted that the kings and lords of Castile had the advantage over their many adversaries, in that their Jewish subjects were amongst the most learned, the most distinguished in lineage, in wealth and virtues, and in science. During the Weimar Republic, the high point of their integration and assimilation into German life, German Jews might have claimed the same. There has rarely been a confluence of two cultural, ethnic, or religious traditions that proves so richly creative at its peak. Frederick Grunfeld writes that had the end not been so awful, we would now hail the decades before the Nazi rise to power as a golden age second only to the Italian Renaissance. In literature alone, German Jews accounted for such luminaries as Heine, Born, Kafka, Werfel, Zweig, Wolfskehl, Bruch, and Krauss in the sciences. Will Stader, Haber, Ehrlich, Einstein and Freud in music, Mahler, Wheel, Schoenberg, and Mendelssohn's grandson, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy. The Jews of Germany never ceased in their effort to merge German and Jewish identity. The heartstrings of their affection were tied early. Their overriding desire was to be complete Germans, and many succeeded.
You know, the point of this is not really to say that these people necessarily made big contributions as Jews. A lot of them, it was very embarrassing, their contributions from a Jewish perspective. They weren't necessarily the greatest and proudest Jews. The point here is that these are people that some of them converted to Christianity, some of them didn't. But the point is that these people they tried to be as German as they could. They loved Germany. They loved Germany with a real patriotism. And they really felt, you know, there's a writer, I forget who it is, that says that you know, we often talk about this, the golden era of Jewry in Spain. And he writes that had Germany not ended the way that it did, we would have looked at you know, early 1900s Germany the same way, as a golden era of Judaism. The golden era of Germany. Obviously, nobody talks about it that way.
Yeah.
I guess that's the point. The point is Germany never loved them back. That wasn't something, and I think that's what we're trying to say, that King Solomon's words reverberate, very unfortunately, very strongly among these Jews. These are Jews who placed their stock and placed their hope, not necessarily specifically, but they definitely were attempting to be as German as they can, because that's what will save us, and it didn't. Probably the saddest on this list is Haber. Haber was a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, and he actually later became infamous for advocating the use of chemical warfare in World War I. In a tragic irony, one of the insecticides that he created, which was called Zyklon B, was the primary chemical used in World War II in the crematoriums. Anyways, let's pause for a couple questions here, because I think this is sad enough, and we're about to go into the next section. So let's start with, I think there's 2 questions here. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, not a question, but I wanted to make a comment. I learned from my family that when my grandfather came during World War II, came back from the front to evacuate my grandmother and the family out of Kiev, she refused to go because many Jews in Kiev did not believe the Germans were killing Jews, you know, because they were viewed as such, you know, educated and
Right.
you know, higher society types,
Who
that
were the Germans? The Jews
Jews in
were
Kiev
part of the Germans.
simply,
Right.
yeah, they did not believe it, you know. So anyway,
So
he was able to convince her, thank God.
yeah,
You know, yeah.
I really wanted to. Oh, and then Mark, you had a question, right?
Oh, it was about the first page, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, back on the first page, the Rebbe said, hadn't man abdicated his privileges and duties? And I was kind of wondering, what did he mean that we advocated? Would that mean that Hitler and the Nazis abdicated their responsibilities
As human beings, yeah. Judaism has a view for what it means to be a human being. It's not. It doesn't just come with rights. It comes with rights, but it also comes with responsibilities. And they had abdicated their responsibilities, which we'll talk about. That's really the theme of today's lesson. So that question is there as an unwritten question throughout the whole lesson. That's what we want to get to. We want to get to what is Judaism's view for humanity. Absolutely, yes.
and one more question.
Yeah, okay. I was going to use that question as a segue because that question is actually perfect to go into the next section. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll pass.
Okay. I was just going to say that if we want to have that conversation, we really need to talk about Germans in the 1930s. That's what we need to talk about. We need to talk about what did it mean to be a German. Let's not even talk about Hitler. That's a whole different discussion, right? What did it mean to be a German in the 1930s? And I really want to open this next section with a video, but I couldn't find the exact clip in the video. There's a documentary that's been on my bucket list for a long time, and maybe I'll finally make a point of watching it. The reason I haven't watched it is because it's 9 hours long. Come again? Yeah, it's not one of those that you sit down and you kind of binge or watch in one set like we do with a movie or with a TV series or whatever it is, like a TV episode. This is a 9-hour documentary. It's called Shoah, and it's basically an oral history of the Holocaust. Okay, it's by a fellow whose name is Claude Lanzmann. Claude Lanzmann, who I think was French, he basically conducted right after the Holocaust. He conducted interviews and he took film to really with bystanders, collaborators, perpetrators, victims, survivors throughout Europe. He really wanted to have a way to view this through the lens of the society at the time, and that's why I think it's a difficult documentary to watch. It's also a documentary that I think it's difficult because the content is also just technically difficult. It's in lots of other languages, Polish and French and German, etc. Lots of subtitles, Anyways, you can find clips of it on YouTube. Particularly, you can find a clip that's over an hour long of his interview with Czesław Borowy and Henryk Gałkowski. Okay, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing their names properly. They're going to be text 4A and 4B respectively. Obviously not the whole interview, but one outtake from it. You'll see that they're talking in the third person because there's a translator there with him, and they are respectively a bystander and then a train conductor from one of the trains that literally took Jews to the death camps. And while we're reading their accounts, I'd like you to consider these questions about these two regular citizens. I think one of them is Polish and one of them is German. Did these men have a sense of morality? In other words, could they distinguish between right and wrong? That's one question we want to ask about them. And the second question we want to ask is, what elements of their testimony led you to this conclusion? How do you see in their testimony, at least the excerpts in text 4A and 4B, that lead you to say whether they did or didn't have a sense of morality? And based on their testimonies, would you use broad stroke words about them, good or evil? Let's see. Jonathan, if you can get us started, text 4A. We're on page 159 here.
Yep.
And we're using them obviously here as a sample, right? We're using these two citizens, bystanders, if you will, just as samples. Go ahead.
He was born here in 1923 and has been here ever since. He lived at this very spot, right here. Then he had a front row seat for what happened. Naturally, you could go up close or watch from a distance. They had land on the far side of the station. To work it, he had to cross the track so he could see everything. Does he remember the first convoy of Jews from Warsaw on July 22, 1942? He recalls the first convoy very well, and when all those Jews were brought here, people wondered, what's to be done with them? Clearly, they'd be killed, but no one yet knew how. When people began to understand what was happening, they were appalled. They commented privately that since the world began, no one had ever murdered so many people that way. While all this was happening before their eyes, normal life went on. They worked their fields. Certainly they worked, but not as willingly as usual. They had to work, but when they saw all this, they thought, our house may be surrounded, we may be arrested too. Were they afraid for the Jews too? Well, he says, it's this way. If I cut my finger, it doesn't hurt him. They knew about the Jews. The convoys came in here and then went to the camp, and the people vanished.
So he uses this line, if I cut my finger, does it hurt him? Right? In other words, there's a little bit of a lack of empathy there, but we'll talk soon about morality, which is really what we want to get to. Let's do text 4b on page 160. Elise, are you with us yet? Would you like to read a little bit? I don't know if she's ready yet. Okay. So, Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 4b.
David, he here.
So, remember, this is now an interview with Henryk Gałkowski, who was actually a conductor of the trains. So he was literally driving the trains to Auschwitz, if you will. In case you thought it was Nazis, it was not. It wasn't necessarily members of the Nazi party. This was a regular citizen who had this as a job. Text 4b, go ahead.
Did he hear screams behind the his locomotive? Obviously, since the locomotive was next to the car, they screamed, asked for water. They screamed from the cars closest to the locomotive. Could be heard very well. Can one get used to that? No, it was extremely distressing to him. He knew the people behind him were human like him. The Germans gave him and the other workers vodka to drink. Without drinking, they couldn't have done it. There was a bonus that they were paid not in money, but in liquor. Those who worked on the other trains didn't get this bonus. He drank every drop he got because without liquor, he couldn't stand the stench when he got here. They even brought more liquor on their own to get drunk on.
So now let's ask those questions, shall we? Gloria, what do you think? Did these men have a sense of morality?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. They have distanced themselves.
So you think they could not distinguish between right and wrong?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what morality means, right?
Yes, I think they could. I think they chose not to.
And I think I would argue, getting to question number 2, I think I would argue that exactly the point you made proves that. In other words, the fact that they had to distance themselves, why do you need to distance yourself from something if you don't have a sense of morality? If you don't have a sense of morality, you don't care, right? Mm-hmm. It is specifically because they had a sense of morality that they needed to figure out ways to distance themselves, whatever it was. Whether by saying, oh, they're an other, or saying, I need to drink alcohol in order to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, what's your take on this? Do you think they had a sense of morality?
I think so, but I also think it's in some ways understandable that if you're in that situation, you're not really given a choice, right?
Well, you're just a bystander, right? Listen, not given a choice is a strong word because there were many people who today are considered righteous among the Gentiles who stepped in and did things. So that's, maybe they couldn't stop the Nazi war machine. It's a different story. But right, you don't necessarily have to be, Winston Churchill or FDR or whatever it is in order to stop a war.
Sure.
Right? You could also do your little thing. Let me ask you a different question. Do you think Czeslaw Borowy, do you think he's evil? He's the farmer who lives near Auschwitz, who's interviewed in text 4a. By the way, I'm comfortable if you say he's good also. Are you comfortable with using a term, good or evil, to characterize him?
No, he was human. That's human.
Yeah.
Human nature.
I think he was human, which means he has a little bit of good and a little bit of evil in him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, I think we have this tendency to characterize people as good or evil. Makes things simpler for us. We like fairy tales as human beings, you know what I mean? And it's not black. There isn't always a good guy and a bad guy. Let's take a look at the way Richard Bessel, a historian, puts this in text 5. Elise, why don't you read for us, please?
Oh.
If you're open to it. We're on page
Okay. Understandably, with the history of Nazi Germany, it has been tempting to paint pictures and start stark black and white, clearly delineating good and evil. For was not the Third Reich the most thoroughly evil political system ever created? However, life is not like that. Human beings are bundles of paradoxes, and the choices they are forced to make rarely are clear cut. In order to understand the nature of politics and the social history of the Third Reich, it is necessary to appreciate that even under Hitler, everyday life was characterized by contradictions and paradox. As we are well aware, the Nazi regime is probably the most criminal, barbarous, and immoral that the world has ever seen. Yet, the Nazi regime appeared to many of its subjects to offer a remarkably effective law and order government. As understanding of the history of the Third Reich and of the wider implications that it has for understanding other societies lies precisely in trying to make some sense of a society in which people who may have despised corrupt and arrogant Nazi party bosses, feared Gestapo agents, or informers in their workplaces, might at the same time have felt pleased that Germany was able to rearm, be grateful that they were back at work after years of unemployment, or to be extremely impressed by the holiday programs offered by the Strength of Through Joy organization. The history of Nazi Germany is also about ambiguities, about the deeply disturbing compromises which made up the lives of people of varying degrees of decency, struggling to survive in the most indecent of times. This is not to suggest that a regime which unleashed a world war and murdered millions of people in cold blood was no different from any other political regime. It is, however, to suggest that the history of Nazi Germany might have more to tell us about society and politics elsewhere than many people may care to admit.
Thank you. It's not black and white at all. It's not simple to just look at the Nazis, to look at the Germans and say, you know what, they were the embodiment of evil, and our job as human beings is to just not be evil, right? It's tempting, but it's absolutely not true. You know, I'm very happy that they chose not to put text A, which is on page 171, inside the actual lesson. I don't like reading it. It's probably one of the most disturbing texts I've ever read. It's actually Heinrich Himmler. It's from a speech by Heinrich Himmler to SS officers. Here's the point. Here's the point of it, and you can read it on your own. It's text A. It's on page 171 in the back. The point is that even the Nazi officers, they didn't view themselves as evil people. They didn't view themselves as on the side of evil, trying to destroy good. And I don't even know, although they did evil things. It's hard for me to say this, but they still they viewed themselves as they were very, very sophisticated. They were very well educated. They used their minds a lot. They used, and they felt that they had a sense of morality. It wasn't that they killed their sense of morality. They muted their sense of morality. They actually were using their sense of their moral compass, their warped moral compass. And their moral compass, the problem with their moral compass is that it was based only on their minds. And the mind, it turns out, is a very, very, very manipulative tool. On the screen in front of us, we have from Rabbi Zalman Posner, Alav Shalom. He has a book called Think Jewish, and he has this great line in here about just how far and how warped and how corrupt a person can become if they only use knowledge, if they only use their mind, if the glorification is how great my mind can be. The mind actually can be the biggest tool for evil. Good and evil, he writes, are commingled on the plane of knowledge. He's basing this, of course, on the concept of the tree of good and evil, which is from the Garden of Eden, from the story in Genesis, right? Before a choice can be made, it is necessary to arrive at a definition of good and evil, but such definition is not a function of intellect. And that's the main point that he makes. He's like, you'll use your mind to distinguish between good and evil, but what is good and what is evil, that cannot be a function of the mind. Why? Because knowledge is incapable of totally repelling evil, or of defining evil, since knowledge itself is in need of clarification, of a line of demarcation between good and evil in its own sphere. Even as the person has the capacity for both good and evil, so too knowledge harbors antagonistic forces within itself, and the mind itself contains evil. So how do you expect the mind to be able to decide what is evil. No. The mind will bring you to a place where you will feel like you are an amazing person while doing the most evil things. Hitler felt that way. We all know that while they had the death camps and they were exterminating world Jewry, they also had courts of law in which they were trying criminals. So clearly they had a sense of morality. It's just that their sense of morality was built on something very, very warped, something very, very corrupt. I want to take a look. I think one of the most interesting places we can see this is with the doctors of the death camps. Gloria, we're back at you. If you can read for us, please, text 6a, which is from an amazing book called When Medicine Went Mad. So it's specifically a unique perspective just on the doctors of Auschwitz, the doctors of Treblinka, the doctors of the death camps. Go ahead.
It is comforting to believe that healthcare professionals who have pledged an oath to do no harm and who are minimally concerned with the morality of their own conduct could not kill babies or conduct brutal, often lethal experiments on starving inmates in concentration camps. It is comforting to think that it is not possible to defend involuntary euthanasia, forced sterilization, and genocide in moral terms. It is comforting to think that anyone who espouses racist, eugenic ideas cannot be a competent, introspective physician or scientist. Such beliefs are especially comforting to ethicists. Nazi medical crimes show that each of these beliefs is false. It is commonly believed that only madmen, charlatans, and incompetents among doctors, scientists, public health officials, and nurses could possibly have associated with those who ran the Nazi Party. Once identified, the myths of incompetence and madness make absolutely no sense. How could flakes, crackpots, and incompetents have been the only ones supporting Nazism? Could the Nazis have had any chance of carrying out genocide on a staggering, monumental scale against victims scattered over half the globe without the zealous help of competent biomedical and scientific authorities? The technical and logistical problems of collecting, transporting, exploiting, murdering, scavenging, and disposing of bodies of millions from dozens of nations required competence and skill, not ineptitude and madness.
I don't know where this comes from. Maybe it's some fairy tales, maybe it's some movies, but when we hear that somebody kills a lot of people, when we hear, for example, if you turn on the news, okay, there's not an exact description, but you're being told about a serial killer. This is a man who rapes women and kills them, or whatever. Pick your poison. Pick it. We all inherently we do something in our brains. We say, okay, he's a madman. He must be a psychopath. How can somebody do something like that and be normal? But actually, if you start to examine the data, there's a good chance you could have known that person. Right? Or here's another example, a mass shooter. You hear about somebody who goes up to a thingy, whatever, and shoots Charlie Kirk. Or shoots, or attempts to assassinate the president. Or a mass shooting, an active shooter at a school, or whatever it is. We have this caricature in our brain of what they should look like. It never fits. But we continue to do it over and over and over again. Right? That's not what happens after they find the kid. Right? As hard as the news tries, they can never paint him as just, it's actually the opposite. They start conducting interviews with his neighbors, and then, oh, he was so normal. I never would have said this about him. Sure, he was a little bit of a loner. Sure, but I never, right? In truth, nobody is good or evil. The real monsters that exist don't look like the fairy tale of a monster. I don't know if it's maybe when we're children we developed this. He must look like Frankenstein or something, right? Certainly, when it came to the Holocaust, it was not people who didn't, as he mentions, it's like, how would you expect people like that, people that are insane, people that are like, spend their whole lives depressed, spend their whole lives empty, how can you expect somebody like that? I mean, the amount of skill and education and sophistication and that it took to execute what they did during the Holocaust tells you right away that you're talking about people who are educated, people who do have a sense of education, who do have a sense of what they believe is right and wrong. It might be warped, and I think that's the point we're getting to, right? Let's keep going with text 6b. Mark, can you read for us, please?
Which one?
Text 6b on page 163.
Okay. The Holocaust occurred with the intellectual support and involvement of the medical and scientific establishment of the most scientifically and technologically advanced society of its time. The Holocaust, unlike many other instances of mass killing, was scientifically inspired, supervised, and mediated genocide.
This is a very important point to understand. That's why we have all these numbers here on the screen. This is evidenced by the fact that the top 50 SS officers were physicians and lawyers, professors and educators, engineers and architects, economists and statisticians and scientists and chemists and businessmen and clergy and theologians. They represented what we, even till today, what we look up to. They're educated, they're sophisticated, they have a sense of morality and a sense of, I mean, one of my favorite things to point out is that the SS was obsessed with the outward appearance of their members. Crisp, ironed uniforms. It looked handsome and well put together, etc. And these were the brutal mass murderers that we're talking about. What we're trying to say here is, the reason I think this is such an important point to grasp is because we need to understand that where they failed wasn't with, oh, they didn't have a brain. To the contrary, their issue was that they relied too much on their brain. Their issue was that they actually were missing anything higher. They had no sense of a higher sense of morality, a higher sense of something that my brain is actually subservient to in their lives. Text 7 is another way of approaching the same topic. Text 7 is from a Jewish doctor. Okay, a Jewish, by doctor I mean an academic doctor, a researcher. Dr. Valville Green, who's also quoted in When Medicine Went Mad, he relates about the first time that he actually started to read some of the science, some of the experiments that were conducted by these medical bastards, these medical monsters. Jonathan, if you can read for us, please, text 7.
I recall very clearly how I felt about 10 years ago when I read Doctors of Infamy for the first time. Several chapters in that book describe the horrible infectious disease experiments carried out by Nazis in Buchenwald. When I started reading, I remember feeling horror, anger, and dismay. But as I continued reading, I became engulfed by curiosity. That was the frightening thing. After so many years, my curiosity as a scientist overwhelmed all other emotions about Jews and relatives, and I kept looking for answers that would have helped my ancient research. It's hard to explain to the layman, even to the philosopher, how the motives and methodology of applied research generate a kind of scientific morality in which the greatest good is a breakthrough.
And this is from a Jewish doctor reading it afterwards. He's saying how all of a sudden he started to feel sophisticated by reading about these experiments that are being done in the most inhumane way possible. Oh, but there might be a breakthrough. And then he had to remind himself how horrific this was. To state what he's saying, in other words, what we're saying is science has its own aims. And in the name of science, rational arguments can be presented that compromise the notion of respect for the life of each individual. You can science your way to it. Does that make sense? You can brain your way to it. You can think your way to a place which is immoral. So if we're relying only on our brains, then actually we may end up the most corrupt ever. So what's the alternative? Well, you might be surprised to hear it, but Judaism has an alternative. Let's start our journey into the alternative by reading text 8. Text 8 is from Rabbi Dr. Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi, Alav Shalom, may his memory be for a blessing, of the United Kingdom. Elise, if you can read it for us, please. In which he basically lays down the real issue with this whole thing and why it's so important, what the alternative is, if you will, to just thinking your way to morality. We're on page 164. Go ahead.
In terms of ethics, Judaism was the first religion to insist upon the dignity of the person and the sanctity of human life. For the first time, the individual could no longer be sacrificed for the group. Murder became not just a crime against man, but a sin against God. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. Genesis 9:6. Already prefigured here is the phrase in the American Declaration of Independence that speaks of all human beings as endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We cannot give up what is not ours. The sanctity of life is written into the structure of the universe by the terms of creation. It is a non-negotiable standard by which all human conduct is to be judged.
That's the point. That is exactly the point that we're making. Based on this verse in Genesis, Judaism believes that every single human being is a mirror of the divine. B'Tselem Elokim bara asa Adam. In the image of man, God. In the image of God was man created, and that's not something that's arguable. It doesn't say what type of man. It doesn't say whether they're men or women. It doesn't. The term used is Adam, which is actually a gender-neutral term from Jewish perspective. It doesn't say only if they're going to be a successful person when life goes on. It's why Judaism, by the way, does not believe in. So Judaism has certain instances in which abortion might be allowed. It's usually based on when the mother's life and the child's life are at odds with each other. But one glaring place where even those that are against abortion might say that it might be allowed is when you see that the child won't be a neurotypical child. They might have Down syndrome, or they might be, or I don't think they can tell autism, but they can definitely tell Down syndrome beforehand. They might have some sort of genetic deformation, etc. And Judaism believes that every single life is sacred. Why? Simply by the very fact that it was created, that this human being was created in the image of God. And every single human being is that way. And that's why when you kill a person, it's actually a crime against God. So there's no logicking your way out of that. It's an absolute value. And there's no arguing with it. There's no brain that can overcome that. Oh, they might be Down syndrome. They might not be worth it for society, based on whatever criteria I have for what a human being should contribute to society. Oh, they're less. This person's worth more. This person's worth less. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the studies that were done at Stanford. But if you have a train, the train is zooming down a track, and you can't stop it, but you can make it go to the right or to the left. And on the right, there's this type of person, that type of person, and they did all sorts of studies. Oh, this is an older person in their 80s. So maybe that person should be killed because they lived a life already, and the other side is a baby. Maybe the opposite. Maybe the person. Right? All these sorts of questions from a Jewish perspective, they don't. And obviously, those would be complicated questions from a Jewish perspective. It's beyond the topic of today's lesson. But the point is that from a Jewish perspective, every single life is equally valuable. It doesn't make a difference whether it's a child who has Down syndrome or whether it's a 90-year-old that has dementia and you see no function that they're playing in society and actually you want to just pull the plug or whatever it is, right? Or physician-assisted suicide. These are all things that Judaism is categorically opposed to. Why? Because we believe that it's a fundamental value. Text 9 is another illustration of this point. Page 165. This is a letter written by a teacher, by a principal, to the teachers on the first day of school, a principal who was also a Holocaust survivor. Gloria, can you read it to us, please? Text 9.
Dear teacher, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I am suspicious of education. My request is help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. Oh.
This is what this teacher is trying to say. It's not all about knowledge. Knowledge is important. Education is important. Reading, writing, arithmetic, science, these are all important things. But they should never take the place of morality. The first and foremost piece of education we have to be giving to the next generation is morality. And this brings us to Judaism's version of morality. Again, there's really a whole course that's going to be given on this topic, and I'll put a link if you want to register now for the course. It's way later in the year, but it's a course about the 7 Noahide laws. It's a course that's going to be about the universalistic view that Judaism has for the world, because as you famously know, certainly, that Judaism doesn't believe in converting the whole world to Judaism. So what is Judaism to you? If a non-Jew comes to a Jew and says, I want to live properly as a Jew, what is that vision? So in a nutshell, it is the 7 Noahide laws. Text 10. Mark, if you can read for us, please, on page 166.
Sure. Those who fulfill the 7 Noahide principles are called the pious among the nations of the world, a title which reflects the qualities of kindness and love. In order for educational endeavors aimed at promoting these principles to meet with success, it requires each individual to serve as a living example to others by modeling these principles in a day-to-day life in all consuming manner.
And you can see them on the screen in front of you. These are the 7 Noahide laws. We'll go through them fairly quickly. Again, there's a whole course on them and on the whole vision why this is the vision. But obviously the first two are to believe in a God and not to curse God. And I think that the whole conversation we've been having up until now shows why that's so important. When you have a society that is built on the glorification of the brain or on the glorification of humanity and doesn't believe in a higher power, you end up with things like Nazism. And by the way, you end up with other things. You end up with alcoholism, for example. Why is it that any addict in the world, in the world, the most successful addiction avoidance tactic, more successful than anything else, more successful than hypnosis and more successful than, I don't know, shock therapy or anything else like that, is the AA program. And the AA program is built on you must have some form of a higher power in your life. It's for the same reason that Nazism needs it as an antidote. The antidote to any form of addiction and the antidote to Nazism is the same. You're missing something higher in your life. You're not the be-all, end-all of life. Anyways, that's the first two together, which leads to the other 5. Do not murder, obviously, the sanctity of life, which we discussed. Do not commit adultery, which by the way, includes incest and includes other forms of inappropriate relationships. Do not steal, because it's important for people to respect each other's property and each other's relationships. That's what those two are about. And then do not cause unnecessary suffering to animals, which, by the way, to be expanded really means respect the world in which you live. And finally, to have some form of a justice system whereby there might be many other laws besides these 7. We're not arguing that these are the only 7 laws you have to abide by. There has to be a justice system which has a form of morality which people have to ascribe to. And it has to be built on these foundations. These are the 7 Noahide laws which Judaism believes are applicable to all non-Jews. And I want to use this to segue into our next conversation. Because just like there is a little bit of a misconception about the people who perhaps assisted or turned a blind eye or were perpetrators with regards to the Holocaust, I think there's an equal misconception about the people that became, like, quote unquote, the righteous among the nations, as Yad Vashem calls them. And even the ones who didn't get awards, because I think to get an award you needed to meet certain criteria, whatever it is, right? There's a book that's called The Altruistic Personality. Okay? And I'm going to introduce you in just a moment to the author. But it's basically, it's not a book. I think it's officially a review of a study, but it's book length, if you will. It's based on in-depth interviews with hundreds of people who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. Okay? 95 rescuers and survivors who had been rescued. I'm sorry. 95% of them were from were recognized by Yad Vashem or such organizations. They also conducted interviews with non-rescuers and survivors who had been rescued. 406 rescuers, 126 non-rescuers, and 150 survivors. So the author is a man named Samuel Oliner, and he really tried to boil it down to figure out what is somebody who does something like that. What do they look like? You know, think of like the Oscar Schindlers, right, and the Sugiharas. You've heard some of these names, right? He really wanted to try to figure out what is it what is the common denominator? Were they all people who had wonderful childhoods? Were they all people who had a firm sense of morality? You'd be surprised by how diverse they were and what it was that drew them together. So let's learn a little bit more about Samuel Oliner, the author of this review, and then we'll dive into some of his findings. Hold on, I forgot that I need to reshare this to make it optimized for video. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Fay.com. What makes some people moral heroes, willing to risk their lives to stand up to evil? And what makes others murderers, collaborators, or spineless bystanders who look the other way? This is the question that has haunted Samuel Oliner for 65 years. On August 14th, 1942, 12-year-old Samuel Oliner awoke to the sound of loud knocking and banging. The Nazi forces had surrounded the Babova ghetto, and his family was told to report to the town square, along with the other Jews.
There was horror, there was fear, there was crying, there was violence and beating. My stepmother knew that something horrible was going to happen, so she told me, in fact she ordered me in Yiddish, she said, "Run away, run and hide, you must survive. Something terrible is going to happen to us."
Young Samuel hid in the attic for several hours and then made his way to the city of Bystra and to the home of Balvina Pietzuch, a Gentile acquaintance of the Oliner family.
I was crying, but she comforted me and she told me the same sort of thing, that I must live and that the Nazis should not get me. So she changed my name. I became Józef Polewski and no longer Samuel Oliner. She taught me the catechism and I made up an entire new story, who I was.
She was not able to keep him out of fear that the neighbors would betray them to the Nazis.
So she couldn't keep me. This Balvina Pietzuch could not keep me. And so I went across the hills into villages, and I found a job on a farm. A childless couple hired me. I had a new name, and Balvina Pietzuch's son sort of authenticated my manufactured lie. So this is how I survived the war.
Oliner later learned of his family's fate from local peasants.
These people were all taken out in those trucks, these military trucks, and driven about 8 miles, 10 miles into a little forest called Garbacz, and they were made to undress there in the side of the little forest and marched across a giant bunch of planks or boards, if you will, machine gunned in, and these people fell in. Some were wounded, some were dead, some were partially wounded. My entire family was exterminated there.
In 1950, Oliner arrived in the United States and pursued doctoral studies at the University of California in Berkeley.
All my academic life, I have been interested in two topics, namely the nature of goodness and the nature of evil. And the reason for that is that I have experienced both of them. It also is a question of, when you talk about righteous Gentiles, rescuers of Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe, in other words, you also wonder why so few? Why so few heroic people? Why so many bystanders?
Dr. Oliner founded the Altruistic Personality and Prosocial Behavior Institute to study and publicize the brave acts of rescue in the past, as well as to encourage more altruism within society today.
So after the war, him and his wife's name was Pearl, they started to try to figure out like what could possibly be the difference between somebody who just is comfortable being a bystander, who's comfortable just, looking and seeing it and it's not about, and those that rescued, those that saved. There were clearly a lot of people who felt that they couldn't just stand idly by, if you will. And interestingly, they found that there was no significant difference between how distinguished the non-rescuers were from the rescuers, between the educational levels of the non-rescuers and rescuers, their financial status, there was no difference. Their ability to save, there was no difference. In other words, their physical ability to save, there was no difference necessarily between the two groups, those that rescued and those that didn't. There was no difference in their political views. Some of them were more supportive of Nazis, some of them were less supportive of the Nazis. That wasn't the main distinguishing factor. Nor was their educational level, nor was a number of other variables that they supposed. I'll give you even the biggest one that to me was the biggest shocker. Even their attitude towards Jews, whether they were more anti-Semitic or less anti-Semitic, that wasn't what played a role in whether they rescued them or not. Here's what they did find. They found that those that rescued Jews and those that didn't rescue Jews differed in two critical elements. Number one, they had strong relationships with families or communities that have clear values of right and wrong, whether that was through a church, whether that was through just some organized form where they had we know this today in America, right? You can look at a family and you can right away see whether they have a strong family value system, a strong value system. In our family, we believe these things are right and these things are wrong. That was number one. And number two was they had a sense of caring and compassion, and that led them to feel that they can make a difference. Now, interestingly, when you spoke to most of them, they felt like it was automatic. They couldn't do any other way. Most of them, and you see this in interviews all the time, I just couldn't stand by and watch these people be killed. I couldn't do nothing. They all make it out as if they were doing something that anybody else would have done, and yet today the data shows that clearly wasn't the case. By the way, they had a lot of other outs. They could have said it wasn't their responsibility. They could have said this is the way of progress. It's just evolution. They could have said, I'm never going to stop the whole war, right? I'm never going to stop the whole extermination. None of them said any of those things. They just felt like in this automatic and knee-jerk reaction, they couldn't do it any other way. Let's take a look at the way Samuel and Pearl Olener write about this in text 11a and 11b. Jonathan, I think we're holding with you. 11a, please, on page 166.
For most rescuers, then, helping Jews was an expression of ethical principles that extended to all of humanity, and while often reflecting concern with equity and justice, was predominantly rooted in care. Most rescuers explained their actions as responses to a challenge to their fundamental ethical principles. The sense that ethical principles were at stake distinguished rescuers from their compatriots who participated in resistance activities only. For these resistors, hatred of Nazis and patriotism were most often considered sufficient reasons for their behavior. For rescuers, however, such reasons were rarely sufficient.
Okay, and number two, Gloria, if you can please, text 11b. So they first of all, they had this deep sense of right and wrong. It was just wrong. I couldn't let it happen. It just seemed wrong. And number two,
they were and are ordinary people. They were farmers and teachers, entrepreneurs and factory workers, rich and poor, parents and single people, Protestants and Catholics. Most had done nothing extraordinary before the war, nor have they done much that is extraordinary since. Most were marked neither by exceptional leadership qualities nor by unconventional behavior. They were not heroes cast in larger-than-life molds. What most distinguished them were their connections with others in relationships of commitment and care.
So this is very interesting. This is very interesting because, again, if I were to tell you a story, tell you, hey, there was this guy and he saved thousands of Jews during the Holocaust, or whatever, or whatever it is, right? He did something that he was a hero, right? You typically have a caricature in your head of the way you would paint that person, right? You probably would not think of that person as having anger management issues, for example, right? You're like, no, they must be the most sensitive and kind person in the world. They don't have anger management issues. You want to think of that person, for example, as somebody maybe who there's all sorts of caricatures we have in our head, and they're not necessarily true. Here's a good one, right? Anti-Semitism. You would usually say this person must be a big supporter and a big ally of the Jews. That's not necessarily the case. When you look at these people, you sometimes see that they didn't. The only difference was that they had a core set of values and a core set of responsibility in their lives. That was the difference. And they could have that and be an anti-Semite. They could have that and have anger management issues. That's fine, right? But they have a core set of values. Now, this is why some of the stats in this book are fascinating. 90% rescued someone they didn't even know. It wasn't because they knew them, I had such a close relationship with them, I was such an ally to them. No, they were rescuing strangers. 80% of them didn't even talk to anybody when deciding. Most of us in our lives, if we make big decisions, we consult with other people. 80% of those that rescued didn't talk to other people. It was just an automatic knee-jerk reaction. 70% of them made it as an instant decision in the moment. Somebody came knocking on the door and they said, yes, come into my house, hide in my farm, under my thing, whatever. And they were putting their own lives at risk. Right? Now, here's the thing. And this is probably the most important thing that I want to talk about when it comes to these rescuers. Text 12a. Mark, if you can read for us, please. Do you think that this started... One second. Do you think this started in that moment? You think they became caring and compassionate people in that moment? All of a sudden, a sense of morality bubbled up to the surface? No way. Mark, text 12a, please.
Rescuers' commitment to actively protect or enhance the well-being of others did not emerge suddenly under the threat of Nazi brutality. More rescuers integrated such values into their lives well before the war began and remained committed to them long after it ended.
And continue with text 12b, because this is exactly the point we're trying to get to.
To a large extent, then, helping Jews was less a decision made at a critical juncture than a choice prefigured by an established character and way of life. As Iris Murdoch observes, the moral life is not something that is switched on at a particular crisis, but is rather something that goes on continually in the small piecemeal habits of living. Hence, at crucial moments of choice, most of the business of choosing is already over. Many rescuers themselves reflected this view, saying that they had no choice and that their behavior deserved no special attention, for it was simply an ordinary thing to do.
Why was it an ordinary thing to do? Because this was a value that they had inculcated for years before. And that's why it's so important, as that teacher mentioned, that these are values that we're transmitting to the next generation. And it will come as no surprise to you that Judaism it places a huge emphasis on these sort of values, right? Here's a verse that's one of my favorite verses in the Torah when it comes to helping someone else. The Torah specifically uses the case of your enemy. And you all know this from Israel, right? Where there are Israeli doctors treating Palestinian terrorists all the time, right? If you see your enemy's donkey lying under its burden, would you refrain from helping him? You shall surely help along with him. And the Talmud asks, why? Why can't the Torah just say it as a regular case? If you see someone, right, help them. Only enemies you help, you don't help friends, right? What's the line with enemies like this? Who needs friends? Remember the line is, right? No. The answer is because in order for you to be able to help friends truly, in order for you to help strangers truly, you need to be able to help your enemy. It needs to be about a morality choice. Murder is wrong because it's wrong. This is right because it's right. This is wrong because it's wrong. You need to be able to have something, a value system, which applies to enemies and to friends alike. Nobody's saying you have to hang out with your enemies all day. Nobody said that. Nobody said you have to be business colleagues with your enemies. Nobody said you have to go get your financial loans, your mortgages from your enemies. No. It just says that you have to have certain red lines that you will not cross. And if you can do that with your enemies, then you'll do it to everybody else. If you have a sense of responsibility, then you have a sense of responsibility to everybody. And that's why, for most rescuers and rescued survivors, the language of care was the language that dominated. Pity, compassion, concern, affection. They didn't talk about like, oh my gosh, this artist I must save. Oh my gosh, this guy is my friend, I must save him. No, it was just, how could I not? Right? 76% of rescuers and 67% of rescued survivors use at least once to express their reasons for the reason why the rescuer rescued the rescued was because of care or compassion or pity or whatever the word was. With this, we're concluding basically lesson 6. Now, I'd like to take the 10 minutes that we have remaining to this lesson and to this course to talk about a reflection, if you will, over the whole course. This was not a regular course. We give lots of courses that sometimes just talk about history, just talks about ethics, just talks about Talmudic, whatever it is, right? This was a course where we took a very, very emotional journey. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there were a lot of you that when you saw the name of the course, the words never again were very, very familiar to you, but you had no idea what it meant, what does it mean to go beyond never again. So I'd like to take a few minutes to revisit this idea, to revisit the whole course from a bird's eye perspective, if you will. Before we do so, I want to set the tone with text 13. This is going to be the final text that we're going to read in our course. Actually, no. There's one more that I want to end. There's one that I want to use as the note I want to end off with. Okay, but let's talk about this to really set the tone for reflection. Jonathan, if you can read for us, please, on page 168, text 13, please. This is from Howard Schultz.
I went to Israel along with a group of businessmen I was with.
Hold on. Everybody knows who Howard Schultz is, right?
No.
He was the chairman and the CEO of Starbucks, the largest coffee house chain in the world. Okay, so what does he say? He's Jewish. Yeah, go ahead. He says, I went to Israel.
Along with a group of businessmen I was with, I had the opportunity to have an audience with Rabbi Finkel, the head of yeshiva there. I had never heard of him and didn't know anything about him. We went into his study and waited 10 to 15 minutes for him. Finally, the doors opened. Then he asked, who can tell me what the lesson of Holocaust is? He called on one guy who didn't know what to do. It was like being called on in the 5th grade without the answer. And the guy said something benign like, we will never, ever forget. And the rabbi completely dismisses him. I felt terrible for the guy until I realized the rabbi was getting ready to call on someone else. All of us were sort of under the table looking away. Please, not me. He did not call me. I was sweating. He called on another guy who had such a fantastic answer. We will never, ever again be a victim or bystander. Rabbi said, you guys just don't get it. Okay, gentlemen, let me tell you the essence of human spirit. As you know, during the Holocaust, the people were transported in the worst possible and humane way by rail car. They thought they were going to a work camp. We all know they were going to a death camp. After hours and hours in this inhumane corral with no light, no bathroom, cold, hours and hours they arrived at the camps. The doors were swung wide open and they were blinded by the light. Men were separated from women, mothers from daughters, fathers from sons. They went off to the bunkers to sleep. As they went into the area to sleep, only one person was given a blanket for every 6. The person who received the blanket when he went to bed had to decide, am I going to push the blanket to 5 other people who did not get one, or am I going to pull it toward myself to stay warm? And Rabbi Finkel says, it was during this defining moment that we learned the power of human spirit because we pushed the blanket to 5 others. And with that, he stood up and said, take your blanket, take it back to America, and push it to 5 other people.
And that, my friends, is what this course is supposed to be all about. There's no official lesson, but I want to know what your blanket is. What is the blanket that you're going to be pushing to 5 other people? What is the new meaning that you have in your life? We're going to spend some time now trying to translate the course into action. I'm going to help you review the course, don't worry. What I'd like you to try to do is try to figure out, when you hear the message of the Holocaust, right, you were moved to X. And it should be something concrete. It should be something real. Okay? Let's remind ourselves what we learned. In lesson 1, which was called Wrestling with God, right, we learned about the fact that we should never allow the Holocaust to become something that's just a reality in our lives. We should resist it at every single moment. And we can hear the message of the Holocaust in that way when we move to donate to victims of terror. In lesson 2, we learned about the voice of your brother's blood, right? And we can hear the message of the Holocaust when we really listen and connect to the joy and pain that people in our community are experiencing. Remember that? We learned all about the fact that you cannot project or judge onto someone else how they should react to things. You have to be there for the other person in true empathy and in true companionship, if you will. In lesson 3, which was called In Their Deaths, They Were Not Part of, we learned about the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name. And we can hear the message of the Holocaust when we are moved to put our financial or emotional well-being on the line for things that are important to us. Will you put your money where your ideals are? Will you put your health? Will you put your value? Will you put your comfort where your ideals are? Do you have ideals that you're willing to die for? Yes, but even more importantly, to live for, right? As we discussed in lesson 3. In lesson 4, which is called Out of the Depths I Called You, we learned about faith and the role that faith plays when we are in a challenging situation. And we can hear the message of the Holocaust when we are more hopeful, more resilient in the face of life's challenges. It doesn't take a big shot to just say the world is going to hell in a handbasket today. We all can say it. Just open up the news, open up to your favorite news website, and you'll find something to kvetch about, and you'll kvetch about it, and you'll be able to be depressed about it. You'll be able to say, life is horrible, and that's it, and God, it's all your fault. But in lesson 4, we learned that if they were able to say in the Holocaust that that's not true, and I'm hopeful, and I'm resilient, and I believe in a future, then we certainly can do that with a sense of faith, based on faith. In lesson 5, when we learned about the Torah, and we learned about the tree of life for those that hold fast to it, right? We can learn to hear the message of the Holocaust when we are moved to light candles on a Friday night or to tefillin as a connection to the generations of Jews before us. Remember what we learned? You have to have a firm sense that there's something that guides you. A Torah that guides you, a tradition that guides you, a God that guides you, etc., that serves as your lighthouse, if you will, in the dark. And finally, today, when we learned about when night will shine like day, we can hear the message of the Holocaust when we are involved in the education of our children and share our fundamental principles with them. And now I'd like to ask you to fill out this exercise. Take a moment to figure out what you're going to fill in here. You came into this course and you had a meaning that you ascribed to the phrase never again. I want to know now, I want you to be able to answer to yourself. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do this. When you hear the words beyond never again, what does that mean? How is that deeper? And how does that translate into a goal? When you hear the words never again, what's the goal of never again? And now when you think beyond never again, how am I making it personal? What did this course do for me? What is my new goal? And finally, that goal cannot be theoretical. That goal has to be actionable. There has to be something real that you're going to change in your life as a result. So we'll take 60 seconds now. I want you to fill this out. Fill out this concept in your head. I'll leave it on the screen here for us.
Do not lock the door.
Twenty more seconds. Take a moment. Make it actionable. Make it real. Take something away from this course. Don't let it just be fluff. Don't let it just be inspiration. Don't let it just be, oh, I came and Rabbi Zushi was very inspiring and I left and I love the course and I'll come to another course. No. Make it something real. Okay, I want to conclude the entire course on a very positive and very uplifting note, and I don't know that I really have the right to do that after a course about the Holocaust, but as usual, our trusty Eli Wiesel can. We opened today's lesson with a quote by Elie Wiesel. We've quoted Elie Wiesel many times throughout the course. I'd like to conclude with a quote from him. Please turn to page 175. I'm going to read it for you, the full quote. Okay? It's an excerpt from an interview, okay, that he did with an interviewer. And he says as follows. The interviewer asked him essentially, how can you, what would justify the Holocaust in your head? Like, if it's similar to the question we asked at the beginning of this course. What sort of explanation could be given for the Holocaust that would be enough for you? And Elie Wiesel responds and he says, the only justice would be if I could bring back, if not 6 million, at least one person to life. But I cannot. The only other justice I would accept would be, and I mean it very profoundly, very sincerely, the coming of the Mashiach. I don't feel any theology of the Holocaust as possible except this one, if the Mashiach were to come. So the interviewer says, the victims have spoken, the perpetrators have spoken, the indifferent have spoken. God has not spoken. Is the only way then for God to speak with the coming? And Elie Wiesel responds to him, the only way, the coming of the Mashiach. This is the only response possible because otherwise nothing is a response. We opened up this course 6 weeks ago by asking ourselves, is there any reason that we can give to God for making the Holocaust? And we answered that there isn't. We answered that we want to continue to live in resistance. We want to continue to live every single day saying the Holocaust had no reason to be. And until the coming of Mashiach, we will continue to live that way. That would be the only answer we'll accept. When Mashiach comes, that will be the only answer, because then all 6 million will come back. And also then we will have the answer in terms of action, not in terms of why it happened. We'll have the answer in terms of Bila Hamaves Lanetzach, as the prophet says, when death will be eradicated forever. When suffering will be eradicated forever. Because finally the world will be as God intended for it to be at the beginning of creation. A true garden for Hashem. A true home for God, where godness will be revealed, where there will be a world of only goodness, of only kindness, of only no pain and suffering, of only camaraderie, and where war will be eradicated forever, where October 7th won't be a reality, where a Holocaust won't be a reality, where none of these things will exist anymore. May it be speedily in our days. Amen. With this, we'll conclude lesson 6. You can see the key points here on the screen. And with this, we conclude our course. And I will take just one more minute of your time to talk about the upcoming course. Let's start off with a little video trailer. This is about the new course that's starting November 3rd. It's one of 2 courses. We're starting shortly. This is the course beginning on November 3rd called The Kabbalah of Meaning. Please turn your attention to the video screens. There are none of you on this Zoom or watching this recording that have not thought about the meaning and purpose of life. Obviously you have. You've probably read many books about it. You've probably heard many insights about it throughout your life. But it turns out that if you turn to Kabbalah, if you turn to the deeper parts of Judaism to give you an answer to those questions, you will end with a different answer than there usually is. Because whatever it is that you've decided the meaning or the purpose of your life is, there's a good chance that you view that as an end. That your whole life is a means towards that one goal or towards that one end, to accomplish this throughout my life, etc. And what this video trailer was trying to point out is that the Jewish or the Kabbalah, if you based on Kabbalah and Hasidism, the Jewish approach to meaning and purpose in life is actually very different. It's all about making every single moment meaningful. So it's not, I went to the store, I bought ingredients in order for me to be able to cook, in order for me to be able to eat that food, in order for me to be able to survive, in order to do something. No. Even the walking to the store and what you saw on your way to the store and what you did and the people that you met and the people that you speak to, the people that you smile to, and the people that you frown at, that's also supposed to be part of all of a holistic approach to meaning and purpose in life. And that can only come, guaranteed, that sort of approach only comes when you appreciate the Kabbalah, the mystical understanding of everything that there is in this world, and how everything in this world is meaningful. Every item, everything that you do, everything that you observe, everything that happens that's not even in your control has meaning and purpose to it. That's what we're going to be exploring in 6 weeks. I'm not going to go through all 6 lessons, but you can pick up one of these at Chabad, or you might get it in the mail. It's a full brochure that goes through all the different lessons and the syllabus and what we're going to be talking about. It's 6 Mondays, as usual, beginning November 3rd. You can, again, we're going to do 1 p.m. on Zoom if you'd like to join the Zoom one, 7:30 p.m. if you'd like to join in person. And the cost is $129 per person and $229 per couple, just like this one was. However, just like this one, there's an early bird discount, 10% off, only for members of this course if they're rolling over to the next course, but that's only if you register before Shabbos. So by Friday evening, you have to be registered. You can either do so on the website by going to PasadenaJewishAcademy.com, going to the courses, you'll find this course, or you could just text me or email me and say, hey, Rabbi, I'd like to take this course. I think you have my card on file. Either I do or I don't. If not, I'll call you, whatever. We'll figure it out, and I'll help you do the registration. Now, I want to remind you guys that this is not the only course we're offering coming up within the next month. This one is starting on November 3rd for 6 Mondays, but there's actually another course in Yiddish. It's called Crash Course in Mama Lashon. It's a 4-week starter course, Navigating Yiddish. And that's 4 Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. beginning October 16th. Both the registration, that's a little bit of a cheaper one. That one's $89 or $169, I think it is, per couple. If you'd like to join for any or both of these courses, we made them in a way that you can attend both, and they don't even overlap for too much. It's only, I think, 1 week that you have to come both Monday and Thursday, but for the most part, they're separate. I hope you will join us for both courses. Again, the registration is on the website at PasadenaJewishAcademy.com, and I hope to see you there. Thank you all for joining us for this course.